This deep dive, this is going to be a tough one, you know?
Yeah.
We're looking into the death of Dr. Ikenna Erinne,
Right.
a Nigerian cardiologist who is practicing here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And, we've got a lot of information to work with here. We do a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
Online articles, transcribed reflections, all pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to understand it.
Absolutely.
The complexities of this story, not just skim the surface.
Yeah, we want to get deep dive into it.
Yeah.
Like we're looking at a tapestry with all these different threads. His life, his career, the custody battle, the cultural context, and try to kind of weave all of that together to get a clearer picture.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning, shall we?
Yeah.
Let's get to know Dr. Erinne a little bit.
Okay.
From what I'm gathering, he was only 36 years old, already a successful cardiologist. Think about that for a second. The dedication, the years of study to get to that level of expertise.
I know.
It's incredible.
It's not just the technical skill that's involved.
Of course.
Cardiology requires immense emotional intelligence.
Right.
You're dealing with people at their most vulnerable, facing life or death situations. To excel in a field like that, you have to have a deep well of empathy.
It really does. And it makes this whole situation that much more heartbreaking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a father, a son, part of a community, an immigrant.
Yeah.
All these layers that add to the weight of this story.
And his story, unfortunately, isn't unique. It touches on some really sensitive issues within the African community, particularly for men. There's this unspoken pressure to be strong, to be the provider, to never show weakness.
And I'm seeing that reflected in some of these online reactions that we have, too.
Oh, interesting.
There's a sense of grief, but also a lot of debate about responsibility, blame. It's all very tangled.
And that's where cultural context becomes really important.
Right.
In many African cultures, seeking help for your mental health is still very stigmatized.
Yeah.
It's seen as a sign of failure rather than a step towards healing.
Which has got to create a lot of internal conflict, especially for someone like Dr. Erinne, living and working in a Western society where therapy is much more accepted.
Absolutely. You're navigating two worlds with very different expectations.
Right.
And then you layer on top of that a contentious custody battle.
Yeah.
Which, let's face it, incredibly stressful for anyone involved.
Incredibly stressful. So the incident, as it's being described, stemmed from this custody battle that he was having with his estranged wife. And apparently, Dr. Erinne's father-in-law, Francis Van Leer, gave an account of this. Allegedly, he was holding his family and the nanny at gunpoint.
Oh.
And it all ended tragically when the police arrived.
It's important to remember that that's just one perspective, and investigations are still ongoing.
Yeah.
We need to be cautious about jumping to conclusions.
For sure. But even with the limited information that we have, it's clear that this wasn't just a sudden breakdown.
Right.
There were likely underlying issues that had been building for some time.
And, one of the things that keeps coming up in these articles is the financial pressure surrounding this custody battle. Initially, there were reports about spousal support.
Right.
But it turns out that it was actually child support, specifically for his son, who has special needs.
And that distinction is important because it kind of shifts the narrative a bit, doesn't it? It's not about alimony or him supporting his ex-wife.
Right.
It's about providing for his child.
Exactly.
And the amount that was being reported, that $115,000 figure,
I saw that.
is completely incorrect.
It is.
The actual amount was $1,900 a month.
Okay.
And Van Leer even clarified that the court determined that amount based on both parents' incomes and the child's needs. It wasn't arbitrary.
And this brings us to a bigger question about the legal system itself.
Yeah.
Is it always fair? Is it equipped to understand and address these complex cultural nuances, especially when children are involved?
It feels like we're only scratching the surface here, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so compelling, so difficult.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, Yeah. We have the court documents and news reports, the social media buzz, but what about his side of the story?
Yeah, that's the part that's missing, right?
Right.
We can speculate.
Yeah.
We can analyze the external factors.
Yeah.
But we don't have access to his inner thoughts.
Right.
His struggles. And that silence is part of what makes this so tragic.
It makes you think about how we deal with men's mental health as a society, you know?
Yeah.
there's this expectation that they should just suck it up,
Right.
deal with it, be strong.
Yeah. That's a dangerous message.
Yeah. And, in many African cultures, there's also that added layer of stigma around seeking help.
Yeah.
Like admitting you're struggling is somehow a weakness.
It's a double bind almost.
Yeah.
You're caught between these cultural expectations and then the reality of your own internal struggles.
It makes you wonder, what if he had felt comfortable reaching out for help?
Yeah.
What if there had been more support systems in place, especially, tailored to the unique challenges that African men face?
We can't rewrite the past.
Of course not.
But we can learn from it.
Yeah.
This case is a stark reminder that mental health doesn't discriminate.
Right.
It can affect anyone, regardless of their profession, their background, their outward success.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that contrast.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this brilliant cardiologist,
Right.
seemingly at the top of his game, and yet underneath the surface, clearly so much pain.
Appearances can be deceiving. We never really know what someone else is going through.
And that's why it's so important to approach these situations with empathy and compassion, right?
Absolutely.
Try to understand the full context before rushing to judgment.
And to recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
Every individual's journey is different. And the support they need will vary.
So what alternatives were there for someone like Dr. Erinne? I mean, suicide is never the answer, but it's easy to say that,
Yeah, you're right. It's not about offering simplistic solutions, but there are always other paths. Therapy, for example, can be a lifeline for people struggling with mental health. It provides a safe space to process emotions, to develop coping mechanisms, and start healing.
And there's support networks, too.
Yeah.
Support groups, specifically for men, for people going through divorce or custody battles.
Right.
Just knowing you're not alone can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Relocation can be an option, too.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes a change of scenery.
Yeah.
A fresh start can create some distance from those sources of stress.
Right.
Provide a new perspective.
And career adjustments, too, I imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe stepping back from a high-pressure job, reducing workload, or exploring a different field.
It's about finding what works for the individual. And sometimes that might even mean separating from a toxic relationship, even if it's difficult. Prioritizing your own well-being is not selfish. It's essential.
It's heartbreaking to think that he might not have felt like he had any other options.
Yeah.
His story underscores just how crucial it is to have these conversations, to break down the stigma, and to make sure people know they're not alone.
And to ensure that the support systems are accessible and culturally sensitive.
Right.
It's not enough to just say, get help.
Right.
We need to make sure that help is available in a way that feels safe and relevant to the individual.
I think what gets to me the most is the ripple effect of this tragedy.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about him. It's about his children, his family, his entire community who are now left to deal with this loss.
It's a reminder that our actions, our choices, have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a call to action to be more mindful, more compassionate, and more proactive in supporting one another.
Speaking of support, I know the funeral was held earlier this week. It seemed like it was a chance for the community to come together and to mourn and to celebrate his life.
Funerals can be a really powerful way to process grief and to find solace in those shared memories.
Yeah.
It's a time to reflect on the person's impact on the world and to honor their legacy.
I was looking through the source material you provided, and I noticed some of the social media posts about the funeral. People were sharing their memories of him.
Oh, wow.
Talking about his kindness, his dedication, his infectious laugh.
It sounds like he was a truly remarkable individual, someone who touched many lives in a positive way. And I think that's important to remember amidst all the sadness and controversy.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that range of emotions that people are expressing online.
Yeah.
There's sadness, there's anger, confusion, even blame.
It's a reflection of the complexity of this situation. There are no easy answers, no simple explanations.
And I think that's why this deep dive is so valuable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about mental health, cultural pressures, the limitations of our support systems.
It's pushing us to look beyond the headlines and to grapple with the human stories behind them.
You know, one thing that struck me while I was reading through these articles was the amount of misinformation circulating online.
Yeah.
People were quoting incorrect figures, spreading rumors, making assumptions without having all the facts.
That's the danger of social media, isn't it?
Yeah.
Information spreads so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's not always accurate.
Right.
It's important to be critical consumers of information.
Yeah.
To verify sources, to be conscious about what we share.
This whole situation has really sparked a lot of debate online.
Yeah.
People are weighing in on the legal system, on personal responsibility, cultural factors.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack.
And that's what we're going to do in the next part of this deep dive. We're going to take a closer look at some of those online reactions.
Okay.
Analyze different perspectives and see what insights we can glean from this digital conversation.
All right, so let's jump into this online conversation surrounding Dr. Erinne's death. You've pulled a lot of social media posts.
I have.
News comments, blog entries. It's a real mix.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this case has become a sort of Rorschach test. You know, people are projecting their own views on fatherhood, mental health, cultural differences, even the legal system onto this tragedy.
It's not just, you know, armchair psychologists either. We've got lawyers, cultural critics, even relationship therapists weighing in on this.
Yeah, it's clearly struck a nerve.
It has.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You've got this highly educated professional, seemingly successful, who ends up taking his own life in the middle of a custody battle.
Right.
It challenges a lot of assumptions about who's supposed to be vulnerable, who's supposed to have it all figured out.
One of the tweets that you flagged that really stood out to me was from a user named Arua, and he says, this is a sad commentary. As a man, mastering the art of income protection and asset management is crucial. It almost feels like he's saying that men need to be prepared for these kinds of legal battles.
Yeah, there's that sense of almost being under siege.
Right.
Like the system is rigged against them, and they need to be extra vigilant. And we see that sentiment echoed a lot in men's rights groups. Right. Particularly around divorce and custody issues.
And then you have completely opposing viewpoints.
Right.
Like at Mrs. Dre, who fires back.
Oh, wow.
With, how is the mother responsible? He chose to die instead of taking care of his kid, and you want to blame the mom? Jesus.
That's where this conversation gets really heated.
Yeah.
You know, you have people arguing about personal responsibility versus systemic issues.
Right.
Is it about individual choices, or are there these larger forces at play that we need to acknowledge?
Then there's that whole cultural dimension.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer of complexity here.
Absolutely.
I remember at Finding Solace, he tweeted, "Men go through mental health struggles too. We need to lend our voices more for men." He seems to be pointing to a lack of support specifically for men, maybe even within certain communities.
And that's a crucial point.
Yeah.
We can't ignore the cultural context here.
Right.
In some cultures, stoicism is highly valued. Yeah. And seeking help is seen as a weakness.
Right.
Imagine trying to navigate those expectations while also living in a society that encourages therapy.
Right.
And open emotional expression.
Right. It's a recipe for internal conflict.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Erinne's story kind of embodies that conflict in a way, right?
Yeah.
A Nigerian man, highly educated, working in a demanding field here in the U.S.
Right. He was straddling multiple worlds.
He was.
Yeah.
So where does this leave us?
Yeah.
We have all these swirling opinions, these passionate arguments, and no easy answers.
Right. And that's the point of a deep dive, isn't it?
Right.
It's not about giving you a neat prepackaged conclusion.
Right.
It's about laying out the complexities, the different perspectives.
Yeah.
And letting you, the listener, draw your own conclusion.
I think what's clear is that this case has touched on some raw nerves in our society.
Yeah.
It sparked a conversation about mental health, about fatherhood, about the legal system.
Absolutely.
About cultural differences.
Yeah. Things that we often avoid talking about.
We do. And these conversations, as uncomfortable as they may be, are essential.
They are.
Because they force us to examine our own biases, our own assumptions.
Right.
And hopefully become a little more understanding, a little more compassionate.
If there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive, it's that behind every headline, every statistic, every online comment, there are real human beings struggling with real pain.
Yeah.
Dr. Erinne's story is a tragedy.
It is.
But it's also a wake-up call. A wake-up call to be kinder, to listen more, to judge less.
Yeah.
and to create a world where people feel safe enough to reach out for help when they need it most.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And to our listeners, we'll see you on the next one.